The Ender Dragon, Minecraft's most difficult boss and the only thing standing between you and beating the game. To prepare for such an enemy, you have to collect resources, upgrade your tools, and plan ahead for any potential outcome. Normally, this epic battle could last for over 5 minutes, so just how has Speedrunners absolutely destroyed this 5-minute barrier, bringing it down to under a minute? This is how Minecraft Speedrunners crack the Ender Dragon. The Ender Dragon is a mob that has been with Minecraft since its inception. Added in the first ever official release of the game, it marked the beginning of not just the game's full release, but also the Minecraft speedrunning scene. As you can imagine, many things have changed since then. The developers added fireballs and charge attacks in 1.9, but the biggest addition had yet to come. The year was 2017. And the 1.12 update had just released. Many might look fondly at this update and see all of the new colorful palettes you could now build with. But for speedrunners, there was one thing you could thank the update for adding. The perch would now always spawn in the center of the end island. But how did this affect speedrunners? Well, in earlier versions, speedrunners had to wait for the dragon to charge them multiple times in order to kill it. As you can imagine, this was very inconsistent and tough to get around. With the addition of centralized perching, however, Dragon now had a home to always return to, giving speedrunners a consistent and reliable way to damage it. There was only one problem. The dragon would perch by charging straight for it. This meant that there was really no reliable way to deal a lot of damage and still keep the dragon from leaving the perch in the first place. Getting to work doing what they do best. Strat developers saw a huge potential in the perch. If they could somehow damage the dragon as it was perching, they could remove a lot of RNG and time it took to kill the dragon using previous methods. The first version of this came in the form of a shield cycle, developed by Cabin856. By abusing the dragon's behavior when approaching the end fountain, you could knock it back and damage it as it tried to approach again, allowing you to slowly chip away at itself. Regretfully, this shield cycle had many downsides. First, you had to shoot down each crystal to prevent the dragon from healing, something that took quite a lot of time. Secondly, you had to somehow obtain a lot of shields to even attempt this strat. Deemed a meme, it was shelved and never really looked at seriously ever again. This is where two strat developers came in and attempted their luck at cracking the code on how to kill the dragon. Geosquare and Matthew Bolan was their names, two speedrunners who had quite a few ingenious ideas on how to just approach this problem. Taking inspiration from Raceworks' method of killing the dragon using crystals, they would first attempt to make a viable strategy using water in the version 1.13. Sadly, this never really went anywhere. They still didn't have a viable method, and once again had to go back to the drawing board. But then, they had an idea. Previous methods of killing the dragon using beds could work. If you attempt to sleep in a bed, in the end, it blows up, something that damages anything around it. Unfortunately, this wasn't really viable in 1.12 and 1.13. The dragon was just too aggressive, and any method they came up with would end in failure. But then, Mojang screwed up big. In the 1.14 update, they would once again change the perch slightly. This minuscule change would be the key they needed to break the formula on how to kill the dragon. It would now approach the perch by flying over it, and only then lower its height, meaning that Geosquare and Matthew would have the time they needed to damage the dragon. The first design they came up with was a block placed on the perch and a bed on top of it. There was only one big problem they had to solve with this design. As the dragon flew downwards towards the perch, the player would often get knocked away, getting hurt in the process. This put a huge wrench in their proposed strat. It could never really be a viable or consistent strat if the player kept getting killed in the process. That's when Geo had an idea. What if they lowered their height by using a slab instead? It took them less than a day from start to finish to provide the community with a viable way to kill the dragon, dubbing this new strat as a one cycle, a revolutionary strat that every speedrunner now uses. One cycling became an instant hit in the community, but there was one group of players who would take one cycling to the next level, the Set Seed community. A group of dedicated players all gathered with one purpose, to beat Minecraft as fast as possible. Set seed is a highly optimized category. Routes made around the new one-cycle strats were completely dependent on how many beds you needed to perform it. This meant that there was a direct correlation between your final time at the end of the run and how good you were at one-cycling. So how exactly does one get better at one-cycling? To answer this, I first have to show you the dragon's hitbox. What we're interested in is the small box inside the dragon's head. This is where an explosion will do the most amount of damage to the dragon. So speedrunners need to be able to explode the bed the moment the dragon's head is over the pillow. Using this knowledge, speedrunners like Ontricus, Deacon, and Starclay all started grinding one-cycling, trying to figure out just how one could get the timing down. They would make custom practice maps that respawn the dragon and force it to perch, and would kill it hundreds of times in order to ingrain the muscle memory of jumping up, placing a bed, and exploding it. Deacon would go on to publish several tutorials teaching the wider community about the importance of timing your bed explosions to explode it just as the head of the dragon was over the bed. Ontricus would go on to be the first runner to obtain a 7-bed and 5-bed respectively. The practice had clearly paid off, but that's as far as anyone could go in actual runs. Getting any lower than 5 beds was an insane task that just seemed impossible to achieve, and for the time, that's what it was. But Ontricus would not give up. Booting up the practice map, he would literally kill the dragon hundreds of times, all in order to achieve a single goal: hit just one 4-bed. Alas, this was impossible using conventional methods. The setup that Matthew and Geo had designed made killing the dragon using 4 beds almost impossible, even in practice. But Ontricus would not give up this quest, and that's when he did something quite simple but groundbreaking. If the current setup doesn't work, simply make your own. His new setup was 2 obsidian placed on the right side of the perch. This 1 block change shifted Ontricus' perspective, allowing him for more visibility of each dragon swing, in addition to making the timing of each bed just a bit different. 1 bed, 2, 3, and finally 4. This was the first ever 4-bed, an insane accomplishment that segmented the new golden standard. But one-cycling was still incredibly hard. Yes, Ontricus' innovation set a new expectation on what top-level one-cycling was really all about. But actually getting a 4-bed in a run was just not possible. No top runner would risk a potential world record by going for any less than 5 beds, as the risk of losing it all to a 1 in 100 chance was not worth it. Set seed runners would experiment for weeks trying to find new setups that could possibly be the new break they needed. They knew 4-bedding was possible, as shown by Ontricus, but the inconsistency and risk made each and every setup a futile endeavor. But then, one person had a different idea, and this one might just work. This was Nacho, a longtime runner who had been working on cracking the one-cycle since its beginning, and noticed something odd. The dragon was a lot easier to one-cycle from the side. His idea was that when the dragon perched, you could simply run up to either the left or the right side and one-cycle it from there. This 90-degree shift from Ontricus' setup seemed to work a lot easier, and it didn't take long for Nacho to prove it by getting several 4-beds after only 1 day of attempts. On a totally different side of the story, the community was experimenting with setups that could allow you, the runner, to never actually have to jump to place beds. These ranged from intricate water setups that used waterlogged slabs to insane setups that forced the runner to rapidly shift their mouse to explode beds. The main premise of these setups was that the bed could be placed on the side of an indestructible block. And that's when Deacon had a revelation. If you could determine which side the dragon started swinging, you could simply place a bed on that side, so a right swinging dragon would simply be one-cycled from the right side. This was it. A single obsidian and 4 beds was all you needed to kill the dragon, and everyone in the community would start implementing this new setup into their runs. But why stop there? One-cycling would be further developed as me and the runner Davey started looking into respawn anchors being a viable way to kill the dragon. These blocks also explode in the end, and in certain scenarios would deal even more damage than the beds themselves. So what's left? One-cycling was at this point figured out. and many speedrunners and strat developers started looking into other areas of speedrunning. And for a time, the end dimension as a whole would be left alone. Fast forward 8 whole months, and a new familiar phrase would once again reappear in the dimension. His innovative mind set on figuring out one thing: how fast can you kill the dragon? But why would he ask such a question? The answer is obvious. The fastest time is determined by how fast the dragon can perch. But Matthew had a different idea. One so outrageous that you need an in-depth knowledge of the Minecraft code just to understand how it works. He wanted to one-cycle the dragon in the sky. But how could Matthew even accomplish this? The dragon flies randomly around the end island high up in the sky, so devising a way to kill it that high up seems impossible at first glance. To help him solve this monumental task, Matthew would develop a mod to visualize the dragon's movement patterns. This mod showed every possible path the dragon could take, and what he discovered would change the end fight forever. These patterns were not random at all. Matthew saw that the dragon had certain patterns that it would follow the moment the dragon spawned in, making it predictable. These patterns followed certain points in the sky, or nodes, and this gave him an idea. If he could somehow get up to this point before the dragon, he could kill it using beds. Matthew realized that this project was bigger than just himself, and would ask for help from T-Wags and other strat developers in the community. Getting to work, they spent just one day on his proposed strat, and this is the result. By throwing a pearl up an obsidian tower, you could build a setup high in the sky, right next to a node. The dragon would try to get to this node, but by systematically blowing up beds, you could not only damage the dragon, but also prevent it from ever reaching the node in the first place. This strat will be dubbed Zero Cycle, the next step in end fights. But this was only the beginning. In speedrunning, proving a strat's usability in practice is simply not enough. You also have to not only optimize it, but also make it consistent enough for runners to actually do it in runs. This meant that strat developers not only had to reduce the amount of beds they used when zero cycling, but also develop a deeper understanding of the Ender Dragon. Beginning with the basics, they would look into the Ender Dragon's code. By analyzing its inner workings, they would develop an understanding of the dragon's spawning mechanics and movement patterns. Using Matthew Bolan's mod as a visual guide, they will confirm their findings. The dragon could only spawn in these two different locations, the front side or the back side. After spawning, it would 7 out of 8 times circle this diagonal node, meaning that all the player had to do was get up to that point before the dragon reached the node, and kill it with beds. But what about the other 1 in 8 attempts? Well, T-Wags found out that the dragon deviated from its pattern and would circle this center node instead. In summary, if the speedrunner could recognize which 4 of these dragon variations, they could consistently kill the dragon. Front 1 in 8, back, and back 1 in 8. With one problem out of the way, T-Wags would focus on the second issue, optimizing the setups and figuring out a way to correctly time each bed explosion. But this would prove itself harder than he thought. Compared to a one cycle, the dragon here wouldn't simply swing back and forth in a rhythm, but instead fly around in circles. This meant that the only way to get familiar with the timing was to practice an insane amount. His goal was to hit just one 6 bed. He had the theoretical knowledge of how to hit it, but for the life of him, he couldn't get it down to any lower than 7 beds. 1 hour would go by, then 2, then 3, 4, 5, and finally 6. He was now 6 hours into his practice session, and the clock would hit 2 AM, and T-Wags was still no closer to getting it. The frustration would start building up within, but he knew he had to stay persistent. If he could just prove that he could get a reliable and consistent 50-second end fight, it would mean that they had finally broken Zero Cycle and made it a viable strat that any top-level world record contender should be using in their runs. And that's when T-Wags got this.
did it. Oh, the animation takes so long. Oh, it's not that fast at all. Oh, I finally did it. Oh my god, it's done.
T-Wags was at this point anything but done. Him and the rest of the team would go back to the basics and ask themselves, what is the theoretical limit of zero cycling? They figured that 5-betting could be done, but could they possibly take it even lower than that? To get their questions answered, Circuit was brought on the team. Circuit is an incredibly renowned task developer in the community, who took upon herself the task of showing the wider community that yes, you can 4-bet the dragon in a zero cycle, but that it was insanely hard to do in actual runs. But this wouldn't stop the community from trying. The effort of optimizing zero would be made easier as a practice map would be custom made for it. The map featured several options such as different obsidian tower heights, and an option to pick if you wanted to use a front dragon or a back one. Anchors would also be introduced in the zero cycle at this point, but not in the way you would think. Since respawn anchors are made with crying obsidian, they themselves are indestructible. What this means is that they can be used as both a setup block and an actual explosive. This combination made Zero Cycle an incredibly skilled strat, as you would have to do multiple actions in a few frames to perfectly time each anchor explosion. What followed was an incredible boom of innovation in the endfighting scene, as the accessibility of Zero opened up for the wider community. Many saw the strat as the most consistent way to finish endfights in under a minute, and every top runner saw it as a must-learn skill to show their competence in the game. This fierce competition brought newer, more dynamic setups to Zero Cycle, ones that instead of staying stationary on one block, would instead move around with the dragon swing, optimizing each explosion. Speedrunners like the Camo 6 and Mavu would both post videos of their setups proving Circuit's earlier findings correct. A 4 explosive zero is possible and can be done semi-consistently. Zero Cycle would at this point be so consistent and well regarded as a must-know strat that if you ever end up watching a ranked speedrun match between 2 top runners, you're practically guaranteed to see it being used, as its consistency is miles ahead of any other strat. And it's amazing to think that this all started with a simple idea between 2 friends simply messing around. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.